and welcome back to another episode of Romantic Dinner with the DM.
I'm Prime, this is Arcad, and today our guest, PenguinDM, aka Penguin. Hello.
Hello. Hi. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Welcome. We are so excited to talk about your stories and your characters and your worlds. And yeah, it's going to be a good time.
Mm-hmm. Just absolutely. So we'll jump right in with the meat and potatoes here, so to speak. Not that we're having meat and potatoes. We'll stick with pasta. Thank you very much. But
okay, yeah. Ooh, an Easter egg.
An Easter egg, exactly. So, Penguin, if there were a TTRPG version of Tinder, what would your bio look like? What would you put out there into the world?
Definitely some kind of joke about beauty being in the eye of a beholder, and goodness. I'm a really rules-light dungeon master who's focused on everyone at the table having a good time and enjoying the game together.
Mm-hmm. Including the GMs, of course.
Always.
Yes.
Especially.
We're all players.
Exactly. Every single one of us. And so... what is your history with TTRPGs? Do you run systems other than D&D? If so, can you tell us a bit more about them? Or is it D&D that's like captured your heart and your spirit and your magical energy?
So I've been playing D&D for about 6 or 7 years. I got into being a dungeon master about a year or two into that. I've played other tabletop RPGs, but I've not run any of those systems. D&D is just kind of this giant, and it's very convenient, and it's been the safest option.
The safest one.
Part.
Yeah.
Very fair.
As far as finding people to play with.
That makes a lot of sense. And so for you, what got you started being a dungeon master? Did you start as a DM? Did you start as a player? How did it all come to be?
I started wanting to be a dungeon master. My experience with D&D was entirely through the lens of how it's portrayed in like TV and movies and such. What really catalyzed it was the D&D episodes of Community.
Oh yeah.
I watched those and I was super excited. I wanted to do that. It seemed cool, but getting into the game mechanically, it doesn't work that way.
No.
But it's still a really good time. I just finally, after enough talking about it, I convinced my roommates and a friend of mine and my girlfriend at the time to play a game with me. I went to a bookstore, picked up the starter set, handed everybody their pre-made character sheets, put some graph paper and Legos down on the table, and we just went at it. And it was awkward, it was slow, but ultimately it was a good experience. And after that, I found myself as a player at a different table, and that's kind of where I stayed for a little bit before I made my way back to the DM chair.
Right. And with that, transition over to the player side, especially for that first campaign, you mentioned to us a little earlier that it was a Paladin in that first campaign.
Yes.
And obviously a character that you ran with for how long did that campaign go?
That specific campaign, I think we made it about 7 or 8 months in.
Okay.
Nice.
I stopped playing the character. I think we started at level 1, made it up to level 10.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I got a really good idea of what paladins are capable of. They're a lot of fun. Yeah, about 7 or 8 months. After that, I played as a druid in a campaign. We actually managed to get through the entire module of Curse of Strahd.
Oh, nice.
I've heard so much about Curse of Strahd, but never played it. I've heard it's one of the more challenging ones, isn't it?
It can be. It absolutely can be. A lot of the difficulty in D&D is really up to the dungeon master, but as that book is written, you can very easily wander into some character deaths very early.
Oh, I can imagine.
Fair enough. And something else we had, full disclosure podcast, maybe there was another secret lost episode. You'll never know. But anyways, so maybe earlier, hypothetically,
Yeah.
We were talking about how there are more character deaths to scheduling than any monster or any DM out there in D&D. And so, despite the fact that, your first campaign didn't quite make it to the full 20, I'm sure that those player campaigns gave you like a great footing. And so when you came back to DMing, what was the way that you decided to keep your players safe when you were dealing with hard themes or just tough, scary stuff?
So personally, I like to keep things as light as possible, just because I don't want to have to deal with certain harsh themes when I'm playing the game. Playing with friends, people that I've known for years, it's really easy to avoid those landmines too, because you know each other for long enough and you kind of get a good idea of what topics are off limits. You still have to communicate these things, but playing recently, I got into running a campaign for some people I met on the internet. And so what I did was I picked up this PDF of Consent in Gaming by Sean K. Reynolds and Shanna Germain. And it's a short little booklet on just kind of guiding principles, tips. And at the end of it, there's a survey. Things like horror themes that, bugs, blood, demons, and, other common things. And it just gives you a place for the players to say that they don't want these things, hard no, maybe, or enthusiastic consent. And so I took that and
I'm worried
put
about
it
that
into
last one with some of those. But
yeah. I took that, I put it into a Google Doc, Google form, sent it to them, had them, send me back results anonymously. That way I could, report to the table after the fact, here are the things that we as a group have decided are off limits, and nobody has to stand up in front of the group and say, I don't want this, I don't want that. And it makes it easier for people to communicate those things if it's anonymous, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah, like we've talked so many times about how, like, with any sort of game, any sort of TTRPG, it's like it all comes down to communication, but especially like safe and comfortable communication is one of those things that I think is like some folks miss a little bit, like nobody wants to be put on the spot. Nobody wants to especially have to go through things even just to explain that they don't want to do it. Like that's a rough experience for folks. So it's really cool that you go about it in a way that makes people feel safe and comfortable, especially if it's, do you run, at this point, have you run like a few games for groups of strangers, or is it like...
So far, this is the first and only group of strangers that I've run a game for. It's been a very positive experience so far. I got really lucky. Read so many horror stories about people finding groups to play with where they get into a situation and like the dungeon master will be like, if there's anything off limits, tell me. But just because they're saying that doesn't mean that in the moment the player's going to feel comfortable stopping things because of that.
Well,
so
absolutely.
It's best to find those things ahead of time. And playing over Discord, it's a little bit easier to shoot the dungeon master a direct message if like, hey, I'm not comfortable with this. And they don't have to stop it. And then the dungeon master can steer things away without drawing attention to that one person.
Exactly. And that's such a great way to do it too. And I know for me, when I see, because I too, I hang out on Reddit, I'll admit it.
Oh, yeah.
I too have seen a horror story or a million of D&D. And so it very much comes down to like, even if somebody says, oh, hey, let me know what you're not comfortable with. It's like, yeah, I'm sure that's what Batman said too when he was collecting all of the weaknesses of the rest of everybody to keep in a dossier to destroy them.
Exactly.
It doesn't make the words being right doesn't make the intention right. So,
True.
The way that's actioned, and I think that the way that you've done it here in this, very safe, very anonymous, very considerate way is just incredible.
Yeah.
Very not evil Batman.
Yes.
Much more Alfred. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, Penguin, when you mentioned earlier that you started out, you did that little that very first DM session, and then you moved to a player for a while, and then it took you a bit to get back to DMing. Was it so to sort of like tack on an extra I love tacking on questions onto questions, but
multi-part.
were you jonesing to DM again after your stint as a player, or and was it like something where from the moment, even though that first one fell apart, you were already like the wheels were ticking looking towards it, and when you finally got there and like were DMing again and in that position where you're, you know, orchestrating the game, did you become more of a fan of one side of the table or the other?
I go back and forth on whether I prefer being a dungeon master or a player. Just very in the moment thing. Grass is always greener on the other side of the fence.
Oh yeah.
But I really wanted to be a dungeon master when I started it, and I got into that first campaign and they were like, you really need to be a player first before you get into DMing. And I agree with that, but I also don't. Is I understand where my friends were coming from when they said that, like, learn the rules so you're not having to look things up all the time during the session. But also, one of the main best things about being the dungeon master is you can just make a rule in the moment. It doesn't matter. We just roll dice about it, and it's fine. We'll move on. I'll figure out that rule later on.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I definitely, while I was a player at the table, I was just filing away information for when I finally convinced enough people to play a game with me as the dungeon master, just getting ready the whole time.
That's amazing.
Perfect. And it's like, you know, I would challenge nearly anyone to show me a dungeon master that doesn't need to look at the rule books. That's insane. Some of the things that we throw at our DM, I wouldn't expect even my own brain to know that. It came up in the moment. I was like, this is absurd. It's now coming out of my mouth. And now it's up to Asterix to make it reality. How could you expect anyone to be ready for the nonsense that can come from PCs?
Oh, yeah.
No campaign survives in the interaction with the players. There's always going to be something that you could not predict every time.
We've got to digress on that for a sec. What's the weirdest curveball someone's thrown you as a DM? Like where you were just like, huh? Hang on a sec.
So probably one of the weirdest things, I've been very relaxed with this current group. We're homebrewing a lot of stuff, using a lot of Unearthed Arcana rules. And one of my players has, like, he started with not much of an idea. He just wanted to be kind of this weird little creature that hung out with one of the other characters, kept on a leash and doing his own thing, just doing that kind of thing. But it grew into, now that character is a baby demon. And now I've got to figure out how to kind of progress, because he wants it to like grow into a demon near the end of the campaign. And it's like, I'm here for that. I'm okay with it. It's just I have to find a way now to like bring up the math for it and make it so that the rest of the people at the table don't feel like they're being overshadowed by this one character that's wild.
Yeah, that's a hell of a character arc. It's like, you started as a baby and now you're what, an archbishop of the Underdark?
like I took one level of paladin and then immediately was like, wait a minute, I want to be a warlock. My patron is Baphomet. I want to be a demon. I'm like, all right, bro, let's do this.
Wow,
let's go.
That escalated quickly.
Yeah, it's been so much fun. These guys have been, a couple of them were really standoffish. It seems like they've had dungeon masters in the past that were really restrictive on what was allowed in their backstories, and they're like pushing that responsibility onto me. Like, I don't know what my character did. You can, have that be whatever you want. And I was like, no. This is your character. You tell me what their past was, is in as much detail as you want or can, and we'll fit it in. This story, I'm running Tales from the Yawning Portal. It's just a loose collection of dungeons. It's, just a block of marble. Let's chisel at it together.
That's a great analogy.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that imagery. I love that idea. Now, the one thing, though, to chisel a block of marble, especially as the DM, trying to guide and, bring all the supporting features in. Were you prepared for how much work was going to go into DMing?
Absolutely not. A part of me wanted to get into it specifically because I knew it would be a challenging thing for me. I have this very difficult dichotomy within myself of wanting to get attention from people and then immediately being repulsed by it, just completely uncomfortable when everyone in the room is looking at me. So being the dungeon master was kind of like immersion therapy, I think. Just like forcing myself into this seat of speak to the room, but do it not as yourself, do it as a character. Give yourself that barrier, that buffer, that little bit of disassociation.
Oh, that's such a good idea. That's such a great way of looking at it, actually, as a whole.
Yeah, and it's helped a lot. I've gotten a lot better with speaking to people. I've gained a lot of leadership skills from it, in a way.
Well, definitely.
So I wasn't prepared, but I got into it to challenge myself.
And it seems like it's worked out. I mean, at this point, I guess you said you got into D&D, I think you said 8 years ago. Did you have like a lot of, I guess, what was the kind of gateway for you? Like for a lot of people, it's like, oh, they played Skyrim and they've been hearing so much about D&D lately. And they're like, I really want to play D&D. And maybe Skyrim's the only fantasy experience they've had, but they think, you know what, this is cool. I want in it. What was that for you? Or was it purely community? Because I respect that too. yeah. Like that's the thing. Maybe it was like fantasy novels. Maybe it was games. Maybe it was whatever. I'm so curious how people sort of find their way to this ecosystem.
So I had kind of a repressed childhood. Certain things were not allowed. So I didn't get into fantasy until actually Skyrim.
There you go.
Wonderful.
I didn't get into Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings until I was much older, but Skyrim was just this fun world, and I really enjoyed the different options and all the cool creatures and how like all the different cultures of everyone that's in it. And so, that was a real big helpful thing going into D&D to have the imagery that is provided by interactive medium like that.
Definitely. And Skyrim's so like it's accessible. At the end of the day,
accessible.
It's accessible and it's fun. Like you don't need to be, like circling back to what you talked about that first D&D experience. It's like you don't need to be a mathematician to play Skyrim.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing is, not everybody is out here wanting to beat Jump King, okay?
Yeah.
Some of us are out here, we just want to have a good time. We just want to, make some memories. And of course, some adversity, because then you form your bonds and everything then becomes so much better when you overcome it. But I think the fun is paramount, or it should be anyways.
Absolutely. And I have players that come to me going, I found this really crazy build that I want to try out. And then I have other players that are just like, I just want to be a gnome that is, he has a little bit of a drinking problem. And I welcome both of those players to my table with the utmost enthusiasm.
Heck yes.
I love that. That is so... that is such a wonderful mindset to have, especially, how you were mentioning some of the players in your group right now, they're a bit reserved or a bit kind of on edge because of presumably kind of not that sort of, receiving or that treatment from necessarily every DM. And so for you, what do you think, the game master, the dungeon master, what do you think the responsibilities are for creating that fun and inclusive space for everybody at the table? Do you think that dungeon masters should be the adversary? It doesn't sound like it, but, do you think that there's that, or is what's the responsibility?
I break out the adversarial DM against certain players when that's what they're wanting, when they've come up with a build that they want to try out. So I try and put something tactically against them that's challenging. I do that. As far as like I think everybody at the table has the same responsibility to keep the game space respectful, kind to everyone involved.
Mm-hmm.
The Dungeon Master does kind of become they're the referee of the game. So they kind of become the referee of the in-person session. If somebody speaks out of line, it's kind of the Dungeon Masters kind of look to be the person to tell them no. But the players also need to be able to call out the DM when they're doing something that's overstepped a boundary. We talked about this in session 0. We don't want this, and you've just brought that up. That kind of thing.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Because that's very disrespectful, I think.
And easier said than done. But
True.
And then, so you right now with this campaign that you're running, where it's folks that you found online, have you found that it's been different trying to kind of foster that idea and that space than it has been with in-person sessions in the past? Or do you find that it's all kind of, based on the communication and just having that sort of trust within a party, whether it's online or not?
Playing with strangers online is a unique challenge compared to having people come over to your house that I've played with people that I've just met in person. It's a lot easier to, I don't know, you can read body language. You can see when someone's uncomfortable, when they're having a good time. You can offer them a drink, snacks, like have things outside the game to interact with. Mm-hmm. When you're playing with strangers over Discord, there's pretty much just the game. So that has its own strengths. I don't know their names. I only refer to them as their character names. That keeps me really grounded when we're playing the game. So I don't misname them or, use the wrong pronouns. It's 100% just I'm talking to your character every day.
That's wild. I had never even considered that, actually.
That sounds amazing, actually.
Do you find that creates any, difficulty when it comes to parsing out of character versus in character, or are your sessions, heavily weighted into, in-character interactions?
We do a good job of mentioning when something's out of character. We're in a good habit of that. And often if one of the players has a question, wants to say something out of character, rather than speaking into the microphone, they'll just type it into the chat and we can all have a chuckle over the joke or whatever it was, or I can answer the question that came up.
I love it. We have that makes me, with our campaign, we also run it through Discord, of course, and we have a shit posting channel specifically for during campaigns so that jokes don't derail everything.
God, is that what that's for? Oh no.
Yeah.
Every server needs a little trash bin for everybody to put things into.
Exactly. It's got to happen. So let's circle around a little bit to campaigns and the actual meat of it. So how many, I don't know if you know the exact amount with started and lost ones or whatever, but how many campaigns would you say you've been a part of on either side of the table?
Let's see. I've run full-on campaigns 5 or 6. One-shot adventures, I don't even know.
A bunch. Yeah,
we do a lot of that in my friend group because we're all real flighty and have real specific ideas we want to try out. So run one-shots for each other.
Okay, well, in that case, I'm extra interested to hear what your answer to this is. So what would you say your dream campaign would be? Like the absolute dream one in terms of the length of it, the progression, both level and story-wise, and the size of the party, the composition of as much detail or as little detail as you want. And I'm going to, again, tack on another one for you, Penguin. Sorry about it. Sorry, not sorry. But, and does your answer change if you're the DM or a player?
Ooh.
So my answer doesn't change because my real fantasy dream campaign would be one where everyone at the table rotates into the Dungeon Master's chair every few sessions.
Oh.
So everybody gets a turn at world building, everybody gets a turn being a player, have it be weekly and have long sessions. Those are the most unreasonable expectations, I understand, but
It's a dream.
Yep.
it is a dream.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
allowed to be whatever you want. Yeah.
Yeah, we've tried to do that once or twice. It's a challenge to pass the DM hat to another person in the same world. I, in particular, have a bad habit of when I don't know what to do, I kill a character. Or I blow something up. So twice now in collaborative mediums like this, I have taken my turn after the same friend who has introduced a thing, and then I crushed it because I couldn't think of anything else to do. The second time it happened, I felt really bad about it, but he was very cool about it.
Yeah. And it's a learning experience.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing, once they get to introduce something and it sticks, you'll have made that feeling so good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Didn't even know how important it was until somebody took it away twice.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, that's amazing, though. That sounds like it would be incredible. Actually, Arcad and I, we've been kind of playing around with an idea somewhat similar because we're obsessed with D&D. We love D&D. There's never enough D&D. Hence why we had to start a podcast. So we could just get like a little bit more.
Exactly.
But
drag other people into it
yeah,
too.
just be like, tell us about your things. But for us, it's like we eventually want to try and run a sort of Discord, almost like guild hall, like quest board style D&D, where it would be a bunch of different DMs and they could just like put their one shot kind of ideas up, but it would all take place overall in like a universe where the party members are time travelers. There's a lot when you bring time travel in, there's a lot to work out.
Yeah.
So
I like that. I like that idea though. Even like time travel might be a bit of a complication. I'm into it though.
Yeah.
right?
Definitely into that idea as a whole.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's still like very much in the fledgling, like we got all these ideas, we got to like coalesce them into something actually like tangible and executable, especially.
Yeah.
But
difficult.
yeah.
You just described dungeon masters.
That's true. Yeah.
But if that ever becomes a reality, sign me up.
Oh, we would love
Definitely.
to.
That'd
we
be
will,
incredible.
We will absolutely keep you in mind for that. Heck yes.
Thank you.
Especially like DMs who are, I think you're a rare breed in a sense, in that like I think DMs who are comfortable with collaborating with other people who are also sometimes the DM. That's a rare kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
And one that since you've actually like dove into it yourself, yeah, I think you'd be definitely well equipped for it. Mm-hmm. But
And one of the players in this campaign I'm running is the forever DM for his group of friends, and he's just a pleasure to work with. He's punctual, responsive. He's great. I love it.
that's amazing.
I love that. That
the
sounds
dream.
so good. It's something, you said that. My brain was shocked. I was like, oh, a DM that's going to share the campaign? Interesting. I'd never heard it.
Yeah.
But I love it.
Yeah.
That just, it adds so many, because it's almost like, those one-word stories, and you'll have an idea in your head, and you're like, no, I want it to go this way. And if you try and stick firm to that idea, the story doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But if you do it and you just are like, all right, this is like a loose idea that I'm thinking of, and then somebody throws something else and you're like, yeah, and that. And then, you just, I don't know. I think collaboration is just one of the most incredible things. Because yes, we're all awesome. Every single one of us. We're excellent. We're hype. But, generally our ideas can only be improved by sharing them with like other well-meaning people.
Oh, yeah.
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 I think ideas are a lot like plants. They really need air to grow. Mm-hmm. Like you got to get them out there. But
Yeah.
Are you saying that's why my time plant is dead? Because it hasn't been on the deck? Was this a
a subtle jab.
all right,
No,
well, fine.
no.
I'll put it on the deck
Subtle.
then.
Subtle. All right. So we'll before we dive into more of the sort of like mechanical stuff of the podcast, we're gonna play a game.
Some hostage improv.
Some hostage improv.
Oh no.
So the way this is going to work, Penguin, it's very easy. What's going to happen is I'm going to start a timer here shortly. It's going to go for 1 minute. You have that 1 minute to explain your campaign, your current one, your favorite one, your most recent one, like whichever one you want.
A one you haven't even done yet.
One
If it's
you
just
have-
rattling around in your brain,
Yeah.
let it free.
Exactly. So you have to explain your campaign to a stranger who has never heard of TTRPGs. And this is like your elevator pitch. And so you're
trapped in an elevator with them. 1 minute, you get an overwhelming urge that this person needs to know not only about what you've created, but also this incredible medium.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you ready?
No, but let's do it.
That's the right answer. Perfect. All right. I will count you down. I'll go 3, 2, 1, go, and then you will go. All right. 3, 2, 1, go.
Hey, so do you like making silly voices and fun stories with your friends? So I do this a lot with my friends and other people, and I've got this idea for a story, and maybe you'd want to take part in it. Do you know what a goblin is? You know what a goblin is? Yeah, you know what a goblin is. So hobgoblins, they're kind of like goblins. They're really not, but we can get into that like later. They're different, but they're kind of the same. So I have this idea for the story where one hobgoblin is he wants to be a lich. You know what a lich is? Voldemort's a lich. Okay, so Harry Potter, you get it. So he's a lich. He wants to rule the world because that's what hobgoblins are about. Can explain more of that later. But in this story, you would play a hero trying to stop him from taking over the world. Problem is, their liches they're very hard to kill. You kill them and they just show right back up. So you have to go find a thing that he put his soul into. And where are you going?
That was perfect timing. I was watching the timer go down, and you.
Where are you going?
Okay, I think we have to give like an award or something to you, Penguin, because that might be the most cohesive response to that question we've had so far.
That was a joy.
That was excellent.
Thank you.
Oh,
I'm honored.
It was marvelous. I think I
feel like I need to like renew a subscription fee for that. Like that was.
This is the buy more option. You got 1 minute for free. we got to buy the full edition if we want the rest.
Oh, that was beautiful.
Yeah.
You know what? I think that person is sold.
Definitely. So is that your is that the one rattling around in your head, or is that one you've done before?
That's one rattling around in my head forever. The villain of it is actually a player character that I did in a homebrew campaign that a friend of mine was running. It's a hobgoblin wizard, really obsessed with Nancy, and it was the first evil character I played in a campaign, which was it was a challenge and a lot of fun because just finding a motivation for the selfish character to go along with the party was a good exercise.
I can imagine. Yeah, like trying to create those like underlying motivations that are genuine, but also like rooted in evil in some way.
Right. Yeah. So it was we didn't get that campaign all the way through, but did get that character up to level 11 or so. So I got a very good idea of what a necromancer is capable of, and I just couldn't shake the idea of what it would actually be like to have an army of the undead, and I wanted to I just thought he would make a wonderful villain.
I love that. And I remember seeing on your Twitter earlier that I think you mentioned that either wizards are your favorite class, or they're the ones you keep finding yourself coming back to.
Every time.
What is it about wizards that, because like everybody's got their character or their archetype or their favorite, what have you, even if they branch out now and again. But why are wizards your comfort pick?
I don't know. I think it's just the versatility of it and the options. I think honestly, wizards are the closest thing to the dungeon master the players can be.
I love that.
Just with how much they can affect what's happening, how many options they have. Because so many times playing a wizard, I've had to. The dungeon master presented a challenge to us, and but wait, I have a spell for that. And they're like, oh, damn, okay. Okay, I got to come up with something else now.
That's kind of amazing. So basically, you're when you're the DM, you're playing God, and when you're a character, you're aspiring to be God.
Right. Yeah. High level wizards, they get there.
They do.
I love that, and I also just love the idea of the evil characters too, because that's one thing, right? It's like, it's great when you have the super nice characters, or the, they're the good, or they're the chaotic good or whatnot. But it is, I find, kind of crucial to have those evil characters, because one, if you have a good evil character, there's nothing more unifying to a party of adventurers, usually, than trying to defeat evil, unless the evil has infiltrated that party of adventurers, and then you're playing Dungeons and Dragons and Betrayal at House on the, well, probably road. But it's incredible. And if you can do an evil character well, because here's the thing, I think when a lot of folks think of an evil character, they think of just being mean, and it's like, no, like, you can have a nice character that has evil motivations. Like, there's so many things you can do with that, and for most of us, there are things that are entirely out of, what we would consider, or what we would do, or what we would say. And so it's kind of such an interesting, like, growth experience or experiment to try and put yourself in, the evil character's shoes. And, as long as you don't say to the wrong people, well, Palpatine was misunderstood, you're going to be fine. It'll be okay.
Yeah. there's a difference between being a dick and being evil. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people get hung up on that. Like, I don't want an evil character because they're just going to stab me in the back. Like, no, that's just being rude.
Yeah.
There's so many villains in movies and books and TV that are super polite.
Yeah.
Wonderful people to be around, and they have these terrible plans brewing in the background.
Absolutely.
And that's essentially what that character was for me. And that eventual conflict of those plans being realized it's a nice motivator for a story, I think.
That's such a good approach to have, I think, because you talk about like famous villains in movies and in media in general, really. And it's like, for me, I know, I've been a huge fan of Marvel since I was like a small child with comic books and especially the X-Men. And I always thought Magneto, in my mind, is one of the best villains out there.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's like his motives are understandable. I
get where he's coming from.
You get where he's coming from. You sympathize a bit. Is he going about it in the most good way? No. Right? But that's why whenever villains come up, I always think of Magneto.
I love that. And I think that that's super fair, because that's a villain where they did give him a lot of depth, very much, kind of it could have gone this way, but then, this series of things happened and it went this way. And now, you have the counterpart, of course, being Xavier. And it's just a very interesting sort of commentary on, well, what is evil and what is actions drawn from hurt and pain. And it's I just think it's very interesting to see evil characters. I always love seeing them, especially when they are the one that you're describing. It sounds very fleshed out, and there's okay, so the motivation is the power, but it's I just love that.
Yeah,
I love it when it's not always chaotic good, and I love chaotic good. Chaotic good is great. But,
for sure.
But yeah, it's fun to branch out sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
No doubt.
So Penguin, what would you say, when it comes to D&D, when it comes to being a part of a session, do you have a favorite sort of level range to play as or to DM for? Do you think the best stories come from any particular I lost the word there, but any particular spot?
No. I think you can get a really great story from any tier of play. My favorite to be a dungeon master for, pretty much levels 3 to 10. Those are levels where you're pretty at level 3. You're in D&D 5th edition. Your character really becomes the archetype. That subclass, you get those things, so you start to branch out and be a little special. And then up to 10, you get all kinds of cool powers, but it's a lot more manageable for me as a dungeon master. It's easier to give you challenges at those levels.
Yeah.
As a player, I really like levels 10 to 15. I haven't played past that, but yeah, especially because I just am so obsessed with being a wizard. Those levels 10 to 15, I'm getting my higher level spell slots and more powerful things that I can do, and it's so much fun.
I love that. I gotta say, like, you're also speaking like to a very like strong part of me, where it's like ever since I was a child, I've always wanted to be like the magic user in every game, in every medium, constantly. I do find that what's interesting, and what I want to just like anecdotally mention, is like I find it interesting how in which ways that kind of flows. And for me, it's like I actually find the sorcerer is my favorite. I resonate so strongly with the sorcerer as a character or as an archetype, and I don't know. I think it's really interesting how that kind of love of like magic and all of that can, it travels in different directions.
Yeah, I've made a handful of sorcerers, and they are quite a bit of fun in their own way. What you can do with the meta magic options to really make the casting unique to your character is really cool.
Oh, absolutely. Right now, actually, our cat is playing probably the least optimized wild magic sorcerer in the world, and that's why they are the best. They actually have a magic coat, and they can pull anything out of it, I think up to twice per long rest.
We just got to 6th level, so 3 times now.
Oh my gosh. So 3 times per long rest, he can pull anything out of his coat up to worth, a value of 50 gold.
Yep.
And so our DM right off the bat was like, all right, so yeah, technically you could pull out like 3 health potions a day. And Arcad's like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. I'll use it when I see fit. So far we've pulled out some real fancy butter, a really nice a lot of food. I'm not gonna lie, a lot of food.
A couple of baguettes.
Always having that.
One artisanal brick. A lot of neat stuff. Yeah, it was. I rolled a 1 on a persuasion check, and so I tried to convince these bandits that we were relatively sure were going to rob us, but we wanted to make sure. Tried to convince them that I was a traveling stove and mantle salesman, and I was like, "Here, look, I've got a brick," and then later threw it into his face to start the combat. So it was pretty fun.
That was a good brick.
Yeah.
That's really fun.
Yeah, but
that's great. Like a robe of useful items, but you get to pick what's there.
Yes, that's exactly
Is that what it's skinned from.
Yeah, that's what our DM said. He kind of like used as the inspiration for.
One of my favorite magic items, hands down.
Oh my gosh, I'd never heard
so
of it.
So many applications.
Yeah,
loads of crazy stuff. One of the options is just a window. You can just take a patch off of this and create a window in a door in a wall anywhere. I love it.
What?
So silly. There's a 10-foot. One of the options is a 10-foot long ladder. Just, it's too much fun. Do yourself a favor and like go to the Dungeon Master Guide and peruse the options that you can get on that thing. It's silly.
Oh my god.
That sounds amazing. Oh my goodness. I hadn't even thought of further wacky applications, but now, Penguin, it sounds like you're speaking from experience here with excellent shenanigans. So what is the craziest character that you've seen in any of your games as a DM, as a player, as, even just perusing? Like, hit us up. What is the wildest thing out there?
Definitely something that's loads of crazy characters have come on my table and from my own notebook more than once. But what's on my mind right now is one of the characters in the campaign that I'm running. I don't know if I mentioned it in this timeline, but
the community throwback. I love
it. Ever.
They're like a little baby demon, and they're working towards growing into a full-grown demon, and I'm working with them on finding math and ways to mechanize that. And the way they're handling things, like, I'm very, very relaxed. I live by the rule of cool. If you can make someone at the table laugh with a thing, I don't care what the book says. Yes. It works. Oh. So I have not given this party a bag of holding because this player just eats everything we give them, and we've decided that there is an extra dimensional space within her stomach.
Oh my god.
We've had a lot of fun with it. She drank some terrible murky water and failed a Constitution saving throw, and then launched a few swords into the room as a result of heaving from the gag. It was wonderful.
Wow, that gives new meaning to the words projectile vomit.
Yeah.
No
I
kidding.
only wish there were arrows in there.
I was going to say, yeah, here, swallow this quiver real quick. We'll need it in 30 minutes.
Oh, that is actually genius. That opens up so many possibilities.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. What happens if they become disemboweled? Will it just be like the end of like the universe?
We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Hopefully we don't, but they have talked about it, about getting a bag of holding and feeding that to her to toss her aside as some kind of reality bomb. I don't know.
Oh my gosh.
That's terrifying.
Just her. I mean, she's a demon, so I don't know. Morally questionable at best to create a black hole with her. If the reason they create a black hole with her is for the greater good, I think that's still admissible.
Yeah. I mean, it's a whole lot better than if they did it like for the lulz, which is kind of where I thought you were going with it at first.
Oh no, they would no.
No, into the breach style. Like you need a bomb to detonate to save the world. I get it.
Yes.
I get it.
Last ditch effort. Hail Mary.
That's
Beautiful.
wild.
That's so funny.
Oh. So
silly.
You mentioned that you're like a permissive DM overall. Pretty rules lax, pretty rule of cool. In spite of that, do you have any like hard no's? Like someone brings a character to the table, and let's for the purpose of this question, let's scrape aside all of the morally questionable stuff, like backstories with like problematic elements in it. Let's ignore those things for a minute.
Okay.
Purely like
let's assume those would just never make it.
Yeah, let's assume they would never make it.
Already that's off the table.
Exactly.
Beautiful.
So with those aside, are there hard no's? Are there things that have completely broken a game in a way that you didn't like?
Or even made it not fun, to be honest.
Even just made it so one character was like unbalanced compared to the rest. And how'd you get around it?
So I don't really have any blanket no's that I come to every campaign with. It's very case-by-case basis. If I'm running a one-shot about a mystery, if I'm running like a little one-shot adventure about solving a mystery, I'm going to let the players know that that's kind of what we're doing so they don't come to the table with a stabby Mick sword face,
Right.
But so they're not coming in with something that's not going to give them a lot of options to play with, and there's not going to be much for them to interact with in the session. As far as breaking things, I honestly, with being the rule of cool dungeon master that I am, and how much 5th edition D&D relies on the dungeon master to balance encounters, I don't think there's really a way to break the game in like that sense of can't stop this guy no matter what he's gonna, I can't throw anything against him that's gonna stop him, because there's always something to counter things. And I have had a heck of a time with one of my players playing as the swashbuckler subclass for rogue. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Loosely, yeah.
Always have sneak attack every session. He'd be like, all right, I'm gonna roll with sneak attack. And I was like, how do you have sneak attack? And he would point to the book, and every time I'm like, oh right, the 5th way to get sneak attack for you. So it's, there's just the min-maxers that do that, and you just bump up the challenge rating. You add more goblins to the fight. It's not that tough.
Yeah.
I love that approach, actually. And I remember that was one of the reasons that I saw your Twitter and I was like, oh, it would be so great to have them on the podcast, because you were talking about a player that was in your game and essentially they were never on the ground, and you were like,
yep.
How do I attack this character? And so what was your response? What was your counter?
So far, the cavern has gotten large enough that it's not optimal for her to be on the ceiling anymore. But I do have a few things in my back pocket. If you happen to be listening to this podcast, now is the time to stop because spoilers are happening. But I don't know if you're familiar with ropers.
Ropers. I think our DMs mentioned them, but I don't know what they are.
They are a monster that is indistinguishable from a stalagmite or a stalactite.
Oh, we've been attacked by those.
Yes, we have.
That's why they're. I was thinking. I was like, are those ones where we had to remember which one was the ceiling and which one was the ground? So one with the G is the
goodness.
ground and the C is the ceiling. I remember this.
Yes. So there's those. Swarms of bugs are always a good option. Spiders on the ceiling. I'm gonna do something with that. The big bad evil guy for this campaign is fungus themed, getting into myconids. So
cool.
Fungus can grow on the ceiling, so I'm gonna let the spider climb on some myconids. Why not? And stick them to the ceiling, have them fight up there.
That's amazing.
Also, things that fly. We fought a ghost a few sessions back. Ghosts can fly. Being on the ceilings is the same as being on the ground to them. They don't care.
Yeah, true.
I love that. So really, it is just, I love that you kind of have the yes and I'll find a counter.
Yes. Yeah, I'll find a way to challenge you. Not counter in a way of slap them down so they're not having fun. Just so they're not they're not just sitting on the ceiling every encounter, not really being shot at, not having anything to do other than stand on the ceiling and support their friends, unless that's what they want to do. But even then, I'm gonna challenge them a little bit.
Yeah, you got to throw something their way. Yeah. They got to be a player, not an observer.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
And that's the thing too. I don't think for most players, unless of course it's something where it's communicated beforehand, and then in that case, yeah, absolutely. But I think for most players, the challenge is part of the fun. For me, I know when I try and come up with, hilarious things to skirt my DM, I want him to come back with something more, because then it's okay, that just, you come back, I'm okay, I'm going to do this. And it's kind of, I don't know, for me, it's very much, it feels like a chess game of just trying to push each other to be more creative. And I think that that's just the best way. Because it's not okay, yeah, here's a bandit and you've got your axe and blah, blah, blah. It's okay, yeah, I've got my axe, but actually I think that I would rather I would rather use my turns to make my random metal homunculus servants do things. So, you're not going to be able to do that thing because I'm actually going to be there while those mechanical things are there. And then he's okay, fine. Well, then I'm going to throw this. And I'm oh, this is great. This is much better than just the bandits.
Exactly. If I never fight another bandit again, I think I'll be okay. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Well, occasionally you got to slaughter the bandits. Keep the roads safe for the merchants,
I guess.
But yes.
RPG arms race between player and DM is always fun.
Oh, yeah.
It's beautiful.
Oh, and it's so fun with the, I know we've already talked about my coat before, but one of the things with it that I love that's really collaborative with our DM is I never actually reach into it and say I pull out a blank. Instead, I'll say I reach into it looking for blank, and so I'll let him interpret it and kind of tell us what it's going to be. For example, we've had a situation where there's what was it?
The Revenant. Yeah, the Revenant.
Yeah, where basically one of our characters being pursued by a Revenant because he took a sword from it.
Cursed sword.
And the one time it attacked us on a boat because my character is a wild magic sorcerer. He's afraid of blowing things up. So he reaches into his coat pocket and says, I want something that'll hurt this guy. And the DM interpreted that as a thing of holy water, which I poured onto his noggin. But
it was super effective.
It worked. Yeah, it did the thing.
Super effective.
I like that too. It gives the dungeon master an opportunity to do something silly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I look for something to hurt this guy, and you pull out an angry letter from his estranged mother. That's not what I meant.
Oh, that'd be perfect.
That would be perfect.
And I think that's what I love about that approach, because it is so open-ended that we, as the players, it's also, it just very much feels in the moment, like we're all there and we're so invested and we don't know what's going to happen. Just like, when you're watching one of those epic adventure movies, you don't know what's going to happen yet. And so there's just so much just unknown. Like even with the brick, I'm pretty sure you reached into your coat and went, oh, I need something that'll convince them I'm a stove and mantle salesman.
Yeah.
And you pull out a fancy brick and it's like, okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then we forgot that we didn't set a signal to let our ranger know that a fight was about to happen. So our cat's like, well, I bet if I throw this brick at this guy's face, he'll figure it out.
Make a scene.
Yeah.
Yep.
And he figured it out all right.
So overall, it sounds like for your table, when you're running games and when you're putting them together, the goal is for everybody to have a good time. There's not, a lot of necessarily negative things that are going into it. But of course, even with the best of intentions, especially with a medium like D&D where, usually the DM is invested in their world and the story and everybody having a good time and the growth of the players and the characters. And the players are normally invested in all of that and also their characters. And so sometimes, friction can happen, heads can butt. And so for you, how do you handle conflicts and disagreements between players, or, if anybody ever is having a hard time with a ruling that you've set as a DM or anything like that?
I'm really fortunate to not have had too many instances of that happen. I think the closest thing to a conflict was just disagreements over specific rules as they're written. And those situations, as the dungeon master, I just have to remind them that I have the final say, and this is what it is. And so far, nobody's really challenged me on that. I hope that I've created an environment where they feel like they can approach me about it after the fact. I try to, when I feel like someone didn't have the best time, I try and reach out to them like, hey, everything okay? What can I do? Try and bridge that gap if I can. But it's a tricky situation, and I don't have a whole lot of experience with it, so don't have a lot of great advice.
Fair enough.
Totally.
Well, honestly, that's a really good reason to not have to have any.
It sounds like most of the conflicts with the rules more than it is with anybody at the table.
Yeah,
for real.
And I want to circle back just a little bit because, now approaching kind of all of these questions with this kind of new perspective that you're bringing, because I'm pretty sure you're the first person we've had on the podcast now, at least that we've gotten into detail about, who has gone into a game entirely with people they don't know. And so I guess for me, I'm curious to kind of rewind to what made you decide to do that, because of course starting to DM with your friends and then the D&D bug bit, so finding groups, but what was the kind of catalyst for, okay, you know what, I'm just gonna go online and set up this game and just play with, essentially I would assume whoever else wanted to play, right?
Yeah, I went to a handful of D&D Discord servers, threw up ads, as posts, told people to direct message me if they're interested. And the first 4 people that responded, I reached out to them and set up a game. And I wanted to do that. I had been itching to play for a while. Last year was rough for anybody wanting to play a game in person.
Yep.
And so I was really itching to play, and scheduling with my friends was really tough. And I really want to get better at being a dungeon master, if that makes sense. I don't know if there's not really a scale to grade yourself on, I don't think.
Not for
because it's a very subjective. Yeah, it's a very subjective experience every time. But I want to expose myself to as many different types of players as I can, so that I can have experience in the future to feed off of. And playing with my friends, once you played the game for so many years, you tend to, I fall into wizards a lot. You tend to take that path of least resistance. And so knowing what my players are going to do, I wanted to get some fresh blood in, hang out with people that I have no idea what they're into, no idea what they're going to do, which is I have introduced quite a few people to D&D have been their first dungeon master for that same reason, because new players have that have their own idea of what D&D is in their head. They come up with solutions to things that I would never consider. And it's always fun. Always leads to a good time.
Oh, that's amazing. Do you have, I know I'm putting you on the spot here. Do you have any examples where they've really like just given you something where you're like, wow, what?
There was they were in a sewer and swarm of rats came out. A lot of rats, like more rats than I probably should have sent out. And I had actually, this was like the third or fourth time I had run this encounter, bouncing between groups, trying to fine tune it. And pretty much every group before them had just hacked away at the swarm of rats, just swinging their axes, hammers, swords, firing, magic. And finally, one group went and they had a flask of oil in their pack. They threw it down, threw a torch down, and that I was just blown away. It doesn't seem like that crazy of a solution, but to me, it hadn't been something I considered. So I threw HP out the window and said, "Yeah, those rats are gone. Congratulations, and here's the XP and the inspiration for that." That was great.
That's fantastic.
I love that.
Oh, and it's really, it must have been so weird in a way, because it's like I could see how that would be really surprising, because especially if you ran that same encounter, like 2, 3, X number of times beforehand, and then all of a sudden it goes in a different direction. It'd be like reading a novel, and it's like one of your old favorites. You've thumbed through it, who knows how many times, and then you read it for the third time, and all of a sudden there's a whole other chapter somewhere in the middle, and you're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Yep.
I was like standing over the table looking down at the battle map. The player told me they did that, and I went, huh. Good job. You did it. The rats are gone. Congratulations. Inspiration. Yeah.
I love that kind of thinking too, because it's so, it is when there's something cool and out of the box like that. It's like I got to finally experience my first Baldur's Gate game this year. And so, we're starting it out and we're playing and we've got the weapons and whatever. And then I learned I could just push people off cliffs. and I learned that because of a Streamloots card that said that we had to push people. So we ended up accidentally, intentionally, but our hands were forced. It wasn't our choice. But we murdered every NPC. We didn't have anyone we could sell to because we were pushing everybody, which was making them mad. And sometimes cliffs weren't readily available, so they wouldn't die. They would then try and kill us. And so it was great because I played Baldur's Gate in between our last campaign with the same party and our new one, and it gave me so many more ideas to come back with. So even now, like, I'll find myself looking at the spells and I'm like, I don't care about damage. I want what's something I can combo really well with something else. Like the most recent thing is we were in this underground sort of seedy lair. And the person who owned this kind of thieves bar or whatever it was decided that they wanted to, get us to essentially go take an orb for them to some rift, because they're like an experienced voyeur, I guess is the best way to put it, but they don't want to leave their bar. And so then at the end, they brought out all of these things that we could potentially buy or have, and one of them was this companion's bracelet. And I will preface this by saying I've got a gnome artificer that already has two additional pets. So there's the mechanical, the steel defender, and then there's the homunculus. Yes. So I already have far too many character sheets. And so I thought, I'm going to take this companion's band.
Just add more
one more. One more. And so, I have all these thoughts now in our DM now. So now it's solid so people can feel this one. And I actually can't say too much because I know that our DM does listen to the podcast, but I will send you a DM, Penguin, when I do.
Yes, please. I'm very curious.
But just this idea of I can already tell he's going to be like, you what? I do this. And he's so I'm like, yeah, I do this. I cannot wait, because at this point, the combat is great and the stats are great, but my goal is really, 1, how can I add to my character's story? 2, how can I play within the context of the rules and everything available to it, but also have the funniest time? And 3, how can I get that look on my DM's face that he gets when we say something completely out of left field? Because it feeds my soul. Because it's a mixture of joy and panic. And it's the joy that I like.
Some people say you can't win in D&D, but that is how you win at D&D.
That's how you win. Exactly.
Yep. And I cannot wait.
Oh my goodness. So speaking of winning in D&D, that's actually, you gave us the perfect segue there.
You're welcome.
Have you had many experiences with, and what are your thoughts on PvP in D&D games? Because like people, as I'm certain they get really attached to their characters. They're like, oh, my character's a badass. I bet my character could take your. It's like the old school, like I bet my dad could beat your dad,
right.
but with fantasy imaginary characters.
Yeah.
I bet my Lich could beat up your demon.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. My wizard can take your fighter.
Exactly.
For sure.
Yeah. What are you gonna do? I'll levitate you. Anyways.
Yeah.
Really? What are you gonna do if your players want to do that?
Exactly.
So it's a thing that I have a little bit of experience with. Of course, every campaign I've been a player in, there's always, if it lasts long enough, that conversation of, I bet my character could be your character. I don't know how it works mathematically when you're player versus environment, the dungeon master. It can do a whole lot to the monsters to ramp up or ramp down the challenge of the encounter. You can adjust the hit points, armor class, their attacks, all that stuff. 2 players going at each other, the dungeon master has to be a referee for that, and both players have to understand what they're getting into, and they have to consent to it fully if we're going to engage in that at all. I am for it. Again, I don't know how it works mathematically. There might be like a character build for D&D 5th edition that could just wreck anything else. I don't know. So I haven't really explored that too much. The few times I've engaged in PvP myself was specifically another wizard character I made as a goblin illusionist who he's evil and pretending to be a gnome with illusions. He's disguised himself as a gnome, and I've played him in 2 different one-shots. Both times it has resulted in him doing something selfish and turning on the party. Both times he's been annihilated. Not because he's not particularly not powerful, though illusions don't exactly do damage. Color spray is the worst spell. If you're going to engage in PvP, don't use color spray. Don't open with it. Don't use it. Don't have it in your spell book. Color spray is worthless against your party. Do it against a bunch of goblins. That's great. Don't do it against your friends. Does not work out.
You heard it here first, listeners. Don't color spray your friends.
Don't do that.
Don't you do it.
You would want to avoid color spraying your friends if you could.
If you could.
But yeah, I guess to surmise, I am for it so long as there is consent. Without that, you're just being a dick to someone else at the table, and that's going to go poorly.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that.
Very fair. Very fair. And so we were talking a little bit actually earlier about game theory. And so I kind of want to just hear your thoughts on, what about, especially with the D&D context, like what are your thoughts? Why is that one of the mechanics of it that are so interesting for you? Earlier in the Lost Files, we'll reference the Lost Files.
The other timeline.
We were talking about, like the theory behind crafting the games and crafting the world and just all of that incredible stuff that goes in behind the scenes. Well, not even behind the scenes, but that goes into making sort of the story of D&D and just makes the time at the table a good time.
I don't know. There's a lot to it that captures my imagination and captures my attention. It's this multifaceted creative outlet where I can draw little maps of places and bring people in and explore it. I can make monsters my own. I can make entirely new monsters that players will have no idea what they're going to do, and that's always great. That's really scary.
Yeah. Do you do a lot of like homebrew creations? Like I know you mentioned you're introducing a lot of homebrew into your current campaign.
Most quote unquote homebrew is just in the moment rulings that I then just carry over through the rest of the campaign as much as I can remember to do so.
Ooh.
And that's, when it comes up, we start with the rules as written as a jumping off point, and when those rules accommodate something that we want to do, we stick to those rules. And when those rules don't, if there's like not a like written down way to handle this, and I can't find a way to attempt that with those rules, we make up something else.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And that's where the magic happens.
That is where the magic happens, absolutely.
I love that. So it's like you build and establish the lore as it comes up in relevance. That's amazing.
Yeah, especially with the lore of a world. That's a thing. Like, I borrow a little bit of like the official D&D, like Forgotten Realms lore for some of the monsters, like Beholders and Mind Flayers, like they're like Wizards of the Coast's IPs. But for other more common things, I don't like the way orcs are portrayed in Forgotten Realms. I don't particularly care for how goblins are portrayed. So I throw my own spin on that. Going back to getting into fantasy through Skyrim, the orcs in Skyrim are the orcs in my D&D games because they are so much cooler.
They are.
They're strong, capable, intelligent people who
noble.
Are just a little bit, they're noble, they're a little bit nomadic, and they just have this strong sense of honor, and that's what drives them. Versus D&D orcs, which are just these dumb, brutish monsters who perpetuate their species through assault. And I don't like that. That's not cool.
Yeah.
It's not,
No.
Yeah, I appreciate that take on it.
Yeah, because there's so often where it's like there's these things that are, quite frankly, rooted in, like pick your poison, rooted in racism, rooted in misogyny, rooted in any number of problematic ways of thinking. And it's like, it's really, it's really awesome that you just break that tradition. Just completely,
I do my best to. It's, other than being problematic, it's also just kind of a little lazy. There's a YouTube D&D personality by the name of Runesmith. I don't know if you're familiar with his works, but he has a series of videos on multiple different D&D races, and he pointed out that the vast majority of the evil ones all have slavery as the excuse of them being evil. It's every single one. And it's just this running thing with all of them. And it's just, that's... come on.
That's lazy. It's lazy writing, and it's
lazy and it's shitty.
Yeah, lazy and shitty. The worst of two.
Yes.
Exactly. But I love, it's just, I think it speaks so much, not only to somebody who's running a game, not only somebody who just loves a medium, but I think it just speaks so much like as a person when somebody goes out of their way to make sure that they don't just include those harmful things or just kind of default to like the laziest way of doing it. I mean, even, to start out, we were kind of talking about how that first campaign you ran was like a lot of unexpected math. And I think for a lot of people, when they think about being a DM, they're like, oh, it's going to be a lot of theory crafting, or it's going to be, a lot of numbers, or it's going to be a lot of memorization. But I think really the key of a great DM is somebody who wants to make something excellent that doesn't just follow the standards of what there is. Because yes, D&D is wonderful and the foundations of it are great. But as you said, there are some things that are just a little lazy and a little harmful and a bit toxic to perpetuate. And when you go out of your way to not make those things welcome in your games and your table, I think that just really makes the entire community so much better. And I think it sets such a good precedent for those who are thinking, oh, I want to be a DM. Because I think for a lot of people, it's not something they think of, right? Like we grow up playing these games and, oh, those are the monsters. And, oh, well, they're bandits, so they're bad. Or, oh, well, X, Y, Z. And we don't think about where those ideas come from all the time. And we don't think about what the underlying ideas behind that is. And I think it just takes, even just one person to kind of go, I don't like that. I would much prefer this way. And then going forward, it just kind of carries that into so many different people. Because for D&D, there's a series of people at the table. And I think it just brings such a light to things. And it's just another way where D&D, it's a fantasy game, but we all know that fantasy comes with some hint of reality. And it's like, there has to be adversity for there to be triumph. But the adversity doesn't need to come from just stereotypical nonsense. If you can actually put your heart into it to make something just a little bit more inclusive to everybody, but also just have some thought. I mean, I think it's wonderful when that happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Having the conflict be more related to a specific conflict within the player characters' backstories and their motivations, and tying that into a villain, and not just going, there's Drow in this cave, go get him.
Yeah.
And it's I got strong feelings on the laziness of just painting an entire species as this one shade of evil. It's just, yeah.
There's nothing that your species should determine beyond sure, stats, fine. We'll give that to you if you want, but it's like beyond that, it's like it's all about the person, the entity that they are and the life that they've lived.
Yeah,
if Drow are evil in my game, it's because they're worshiping a spider queen who is evil, and that's motivating them to do evil things. So when you see a gray-skinned elf on the street, don't stab them at first sight. They might just be traveling.
Exactly.
These cultists, you can tell the cultists. You see a cultist, they're a cultist. That's a thing.
Because the cult,
that's an occupation and a culture.
Yes.
And not
it's rooted in actions. It's rooted in their actions.
Yes, instead of passives. I like that.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
So to shift gears a little bit, well, not too much really. This is one we were so excited to get your take on this, actually, because you do, again, represent a really, really unique perspective because you've done in-person campaigns, you've done online, you've done with friends, you've done with strangers, you've had a really wide kind of range of games with lots of different people. And so we see a lot where people want to join D&D. They'll hear us talking about it on our stream, or they'll see it as it is a very culturally pervasive thing right now, and they want to join, but they don't know how, or they had a bad experience. And like those players of yours you've talked about who they've had railroading DMs before or bad experiences.
And there's not really a rule book on conduct necessarily, not in an overarching really way.
Exactly. So what advice would you give to people, and what would you tell people, and how would you direct just people? Maybe if it's for their first time looking for a campaign, or maybe they've had a break and they just want to get back into it. How would you advise people to look for that community, and how would you advise them to vet it?
That's a complicated one.
It is.
For sure.
Yeah.
Another thing I have strong feelings on.
Share those feelings. This is the place.
You're playing this game with people, whether it be with friends or strangers. There need to be boundaries. You set those boundaries early, and you enforce them, and you don't allow, if they get crossed and there's not an immediate reversal, you leave, walk away from the table. And that's easier said than done by a long shot. But that's really the best way to approach RPGs like this, because it's a very vulnerable medium. You're sitting around a table, and it's easier when it's people If you have a group of people nearby that you can pick up the starter set for D&D and just run at it, that's totally valid, totally excellent. I love that. But if you have to go to the internet to find people to play with, it gets a little more dangerous, and that sucks. There's pockets of this community that are angry, toxic people, and don't suffer them for the sake of being polite. Leave. Back out. Don't give. No.
I like that.
Yeah.
I think that's
those
so
are words to
important.
live by, beyond D&D even.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think as a culture, we just need to start doing that more. I think so many of us, will laugh at something awkwardly because it's like, it makes us uncomfortable, or will, feel some sort of debt to stay in these situations because, they're putting the time in, or, and certain folks, if they are exceptionally toxic, will sometimes make you feel like you owe them that time, or that, permissive of boundaries being crossed, and it's just absolutely not. And those people really need to have a few people leave the table sometimes before it starts occurring to them that they're the problem. So
It's very much a thing that a lot of people have to learn the hard way, and it's easy. It's definitely easy for me to say, set your boundaries and leave. As a male presenting person, I'm allowed a little bit more to call someone out when they've wronged me. A lot of my friends that are female presenting, they don't always feel safe to tell a person that they've made them feel uncomfortable, and I don't have any advice for that situation.
No.
That's not something I've gone through. But
Yeah.
and that's definitely a thing that is possible to happen in this community because, like I said, there's nasty little pockets of terrible, terrible people. But there's other options than D&D. There's other tabletop RPGs that have different communities, different rules that might be easier for you to get into, might be more interesting. So if Dungeons and Dragons doesn't appeal to you because the community was shitty or you didn't enjoy like all the rules with it, don't give up on tabletop RPGs. Find something else. There's a ton of content creators out there making their own like small people on like small organizations on Patreon or what have you, and just there's a lot of options other than D&D.
Absolutely. And I think another important thing too, and I think it was kind of one of the things that we really wanted to make sure to highlight and touch on when we even got the idea to do this podcast was, it does not have to be like that. You don't have to deal with a railroading DM. You don't need to feel frustrated or like you lack agency or like you're not being treated with basic humanity or respect, or that people are crossing your boundaries. And it feels like sometimes, especially with the internet, it feels like we're all very connected, but we all are still at times very isolated. And, it was so crazy for me because my sort of first introduction to D&D was, when I was in high school and kind of just playing around with friends. And then, in my late 20s, getting back into it and starting to do it. And it's been nothing but good experiences. And then, sometimes I'll be talking to somebody who, maybe I haven't talked to in a few years or something like that, or a new friend, and I'll mention D&D, and sometimes the reaction is, oh, how can you deal with that? And then they'll relay and sometimes they're horrific, and sometimes it's, just things where it's like, oh yeah, yikes, it would have been really nice if the people you were playing with had some, common courtesy and decency and empathy. Yeah. And I think it's unfortunately, there's not a huge forum to talk about these things. Like it's great to have Reddit and it's great to have those things, but I think for a lot of people, they don't realize, that that's not the norm. That's not the culture. That's not what you need to endure, and I think unfortunately a lot of toxic people do, especially kind of gravitate to this medium in ways because they can kind of blame it on, it's a character, blah, blah, blah. And I think it's very important to make sure that it's stated that no, somebody can have an evil character. As we were saying earlier, somebody can have an evil character, somebody can have a bad character, somebody can have an arc, etc., that does not make people at the table feel uncomfortable, that does not cross boundaries. And so I think it's just very important to make sure that that's out there.
Yeah, and to touch on that, it's that excuse of it's what my character would do is absolute bullshit. because you made that character.
Mm-hmm.
You're responsible for those decisions and those actions. You decided they would do that. You made this character an asshole. Why'd you do that?
Exactly.
It's not an excuse. You don't get to hide behind that and act like it's okay to be rude to people.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's like, you absolutely have the freedom to say, oh, well, it's what my character would do. But everybody else at the table has the freedom to say, okay, well, then we're not going to play with you because the character that you've created is harmful. Yeah. And, exactly. that's fair.
That's exactly it.
Oh, man, I'm sorry, Derek. He suddenly had an aneurysm and he's dead. I guess you got to roll up another one. I'm sorry. I can't. That's what the dice said.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Oh, and so now, arguably, maybe the hardest question of the entire evening.
I'm so scared.
I know. Oh, this one isn't fully hostage improv, I promise.
Okay.
But so, what is it about this particular medium, D&D, that has captured your interest and your passion? And because I'm sure, it seems to be sort of a theme throughout people we talk to who enjoy it kind of as much as we do, enough to give up an hour or two of their time to get to talk about it anyways, where, is it something that has completely sort of taken over your life? Like, I know every time I'll look over at Arcad and he's on his phone, I'm like, what are you up to? Looking up spells. What are you up to? Oh, just trying to figure out how I'm going to do this with my character.
Yep.
So yeah, what is it for you?
It's like I've mentioned before, it's a very multifaceted creative outlet. It's great for so many things. There's writing and world building. You can draw maps, draw up your characters, make monsters, draw monsters, come up with stories about them. I've seen people make their own dungeon tiles for the game out of foam and paint, and you can paint miniatures, and you get practice voice acting. I've seen bards that use it as an excuse to play a guitar around their friends. There's so much room for so many forms of expression within the hobby that it just feels boundless, and I have a lot of fun exploring that. And other than the creative stuff, it has been a great thing for me personally to sort of build up those soft social skills of being able to speak to a room full of people, being able to read body language to understand when somebody's not feeling it anymore, building up empathy. It's a learned skill, and learning how to communicate effectively and properly, team building, creative problem solving, collective bargaining. There's just so much to it.
Absolutely.
That's beautiful. That's like a really nice way of putting it. Like, and I think you're right. There's something for everybody there.
And I do have one more piece of advice for anybody that's looking to get into D&D. Don't pick True Strike. It's the stupidest cantrip. It doesn't work. I don't know why it's there. Don't do that. Don't do it. It's not worth your time.
Oh, that's beautiful. That was perfection. So good.
There's the advice. That's the clip for the episode. Don't pick True Strike.
It's garbage. Don't do it.
Amazing.
But I love that, and it is so true. I mean, when playing D&D, you are an actor, you're an improv, you are a writer. It's so many different things, and that's the other thing. It's very much you get out of it kind of what you put into it sort of deal. If somebody wants to have kind of a basic minimal experience, that's totally fine, and that's completely doable. If they're a combat monkey and they're like, oh well, I don't really like the RP stuff, and it's like, it is a great tool for if somebody wants to come out of that shell or wants to do that a little bit more. But it also is perfectly accessible if somebody isn't quite there yet. And I think that it is a really nurturing medium in the way that it does. I think it brings out a lot of good, and I think it creates a space where it's a lot easier to do things that might be internally scary, for a lot of us. Even if that thing is something that's very normal or very, I guess I won't say normal, but very intuitive to somebody else. Within the D&D space, it really gives those who maybe don't feel as intuitive about X thing the space to do it, because you're not doing it as yourself. You're doing it as a character. And again, I think it comes back to that separation where you're still very much there and you're still very present, but it is a very safe, usually, of course, if you have the right people and you are, having a good time with it, it is a really, really good place to just get to explore yourself and get to grow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've heard lots of stories of people using it as a way to, poke at some insecurities they have or play with things that they wouldn't normally do if they were using their own name and such. It's great.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so now we are on to the alignment personality quiz. So earlier today, we sent you a list of a couple of different phrases. And so did one or more of them resonate with you? And if so, what one would you say kind of resonated the most?
I have to pick one?
Well, you can do one or two.
Okay. The two that really stood out to me the most were, the game's only fun if we play fair, and I'll let you roll for it.
Excellent. Okay, so I will pull that up. You can't just have it, but I'll let you roll for it. We'll start with that one, I think, because it is true neutral. So interesting. And so I'll read a little bit of it. And so I'll read them both to you, and then let's go back to you, and you can let us know if you think that they apply, if you think they don't apply, if you would add anything. Sound good?
Sounds great.
All right.
Perfect.
So true neutral. Neutral is a hard balance to strike. It's not perfection, as everyone's technique is personal. Perfect is what's right for you. But a neutral DM finds a path between permissive, strict, threat, and reward that usually appeals to everyone. The generalized approach draws from tips and tricks from lots of practice and playing multiple systems across a long gaming history. All right, so that one's pretty close. And then the other one. Okay. The game is only fun if we're going to play fair. Lawful good. Ooh, a new one. A lawful good DM likes a nice balanced game in the hopes that everyone gets as much enjoyment as possible. For example, lawful goods might choose to have their players use a fixed set of numbers to generate their characters rather than roll dice to create a random set. They're unlikely to so much as bend the rules for fear of causing a problem later on in the campaign. Well, that just doesn't fit.
No, that's not too accurate. They really took lawful and took that a little too literally, I think.
I felt like the first line was good, but
it started out good.
Well, what are your thoughts?
What do you think? Yeah,
definitely that first line of wanting everyone to have a good time at the table. That's always my first priority. And the true neutral stuff was flattering. I hope that I can live up to some of those statements, but I don't know. Time will tell.
I would say from what we've heard from you, I think that it sounds like you do an excellent job.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely. Based on what you've been telling us, it sounds like, and the fact that you just the amount of fun in your voice when you talk about it is so indicative of your love for the medium.
Have a good time. Have a real good time with it.
I would say it's hard not to. There are definitely times where I've left a D&D session, I've been like, that was, that's not how I wanted that to go, or something like that. But it's the overall love of the medium it's just so palpable. I mean, it's very hard to shake the foundational love for just something that has so much potential for excellence.
Definitely left a session or two going, man, I really shouldn't have used color spray, or why did I take True Strike? And then really beating myself up for those decisions. But the rest of it, as long as I, had a good time with people, got a few laughs in, I called, and everyone's ready for the next one, I call that a success.
I love it.
I love that.
That's definitely the definition that we're going with.
And now we're going to pass the question off to you friends out there right now listening to this romantic dinner. I'm actually really curious because this session has got me thinking, how do you all play D&D? If you're listening, if you're part of a campaign, if you've been part of a campaign in the past, is it online? Is it in person? Is it with friends? Is it with strangers? Like, is there other, I'm sure there are. What are the other options out there? Give us your brick. Reach into your, what's the coat called?
Magic coat.
Reach into your magic coat. And
Aptly named.
Throw us out some facts.
Yeah. Let us know. Comment, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, wherever you're listening to this, let us know. Mm-hmm. And with that, Penguin, we have pretty well come to the end of this lovely chat, this lovely dinner that we've had. How was your pasta?
It was fantastic.
Oh, excellent.
Perfect.
Immaculate.
I love.
Yes.
I love
good.
it.
And the chicken parm, nicely crisped, not too dry.
Chef's kiss.
Excellent.
Magnificent. And so take us out, Penguin. Tell the people, tell the listeners, this is your plug away. Socials, projects, anything you want to talk about, anything you want to share with the people.
I don't have anything personally that I'm working on publicly that I can plug. I do, however, have a friend I would like to support with this platform, if I may.
Absolutely.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
They're a very dear friend, a wonderful human being, an incredibly skilled artist, currently working as a tattoo apprentice. So they're selling lots of art. Any bit of money coming in is wonderful. You can find them on patreon.com/second-rate-wizard. Check them out. They're wonderful.
Perfect. And we'll make sure to include a link to that in the description for this episode.
Absolutely.
I appreciate that.
Oh, and that is such a wonderful thing too. I love that approach. That's honestly lifting up friends, supporting creators, chef's kiss.
Yeah. They're a second-rate wizard, but they've got you as a first-rate friend.
I love that.
That's very sweet.
Well, thank you so much once again for joining us, Penguin. Prime, thank you for being here with me, as always.
And Arcad, thank you for being here with us too.
And thank the both of you for letting me be here with you while you be here with me.
Oh,
amazing.
Excellent. And all of our dogs, thank you for being here with us.
Yes. Thank you, puppies, for being mostly quiet. Mm-hmm. We appreciate it.
Yeah. And if anyone heard my dog crying, I swear she's fine. She just is upset that I'm not petting her.
Oh, understandable.
Facts. Ours, same. All right.
Have a good night, everyone. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See you next week. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Romantic Dinner with the DM. We are so excited to have you on our journey as we learn about the worlds and stories created by dungeon masters and game masters in this wonderful, wonderful medium of TTRPGs.
We've got new episodes coming out weekly, and if you're jonesing for new content in between, check out our YouTube.
Link below.
And follow us on twitch.tv/Arcad and Prime.
We'll see you next week and really hope that you enjoyed the episode. Bye.